happening now. We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode 208 for Thursday, February the 11th, 2021. And yes, we are here on a Thursday because of someone being silly. That would be me. But my name is Wesley Fryer. I'm coming to you from balmy Central Oklahoma, where it's 19 degrees tonight. It is so warm, but we are anticipating this Arctic blast that might bring 10 to 15 inches of snow on Sunday and Monday. And this is going to be the coldest temperatures we've had since 1983. And we actually may get to zero But Jason is laughing. Here in Oklahoma City, I am the technology integration and innovation specialist at the Cassidy School, teaching media literacy to 5th and 6th graders and helping coach our teachers on some technology. But I'm joined by the man who lives in the frigid north. Not quite the great white north, as Bob and Doug would know it, but relative to me, it is. How are you tonight in frigid Missoula land, Dr.
I'm pretty good. I know that you have epic low temperatures hitting that low single digit, but I wanted to note in Missoula right now it's -4. -19 if you include the wind chill. But that's not actually the cold spot in the state. This may not be it, but it's got to be pretty close. It's -22 in Cutbank, Montana, which is in northeastern Montana near, kind of north central Montana near the U.S.-Canadian border. And with wind chill, it feels a crisp -39 in old Cutbank. So, welcome to Montana weather. But luckily, I'm not a weather guy. I am the assistant director and curriculum director of the Montana Digital Academy, Montana's state virtual school located on the beautiful and very chilly University of Montana campus right here in Missoula, Montana. And, we've had pretty epic cold spell for the last week or so. It's been dumping snow. I think it snowed almost all day long, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Today, I kept my sidewalk shoveled, but today the wind kept blowing the snow back onto my sidewalk. So we had some drifts today, but we haven't had much of a winter so far. And I have to say, as I've mentioned in the past on the podcast, if we don't have winter snow, then we almost certainly have summer fires. And so I am always very thankful when there's a lot of snowpack up in the mountains, because that means that we have a meaningful chance of holding off a fire-mageddon sort of things. But I don't think this podcast is about weather. Wes, what is the EdTech Situation Room all about?
Well, we are here to talk about the past week's technology headlines through an educational lens. And tonight, you can go to our links, as always, on edtechsr.com/links. We'll be dropping the links that we discuss into our live chat, which you are accessing either through YouTube or Facebook if you happen to be joining live. And our topics this week, as they typically are some familiar titles: the tech correction, Apple, the Googles, Microsoft, privacy, security, connectivity, and space. And we'll end with a Geek of the Week, and we'll just prepare you in advance not to pass out, but I think I will limit myself to one Geek of the Week. So where would you like to start tonight, Dr. Neiffer?
Well, it's our top topic, and there's a lot of interesting things in there. Let's go ahead and head down the tech correction road. First and foremost, The Verge reported yesterday on February 10th that Facebook is going to start testing cutting back on political posts in the news feed. And this is actually, to be honest, it seems like this is a little too late. I think there is a lot of potential to this, but Facebook wants to start seeing what engagement looks like when they start reducing the logarithmic kick-up of political post on the top of your feed. And they're going to start off with 3 countries: Brazil, Canada, and Indonesia. And then, assuming that test doesn't, blow things up, they'll try it in the United States a couple of weeks later. And their project manager wrote in their announcement about this, the people don't want political content to take over their news feed. And I'm pretty sure the people have been saying this well before 2021. So it seems to me they're kind of a legger in the market here. And, as we've talked about in the past on the podcast, I still can't wrap my brain around what the future of Facebook is if we are to figure out a way to not turn these tools into harbingers of antisocial behavior, right? Like, the bottom line is that we have to find a way to be social without being antisocial. And this is obviously a step in that direction. But at the same time, I also realize that people like to talk about politics, and politics is very personal. And, what has happened in the last, 4, 5, 6, 7 years is that people's political views have become very much a part of their identity. And there's obviously large implications to that, especially in light of the fact that, to be honest, politics is starting to become such a dividing factor in the way we relate to each other in the United States that, I still don't know what an end game for Facebook looks like. But I guess I'll start off here, Wes. Does this impact your use or perception of Facebook at all if you saw less political posts on the platform?
I mean, I'm not going to Facebook to see political posts. I do follow some folks on Twitter, and I see some things there. Facebook, I'm really connecting more with family, and every once in a while I will share something political, but it's kind of rare. Actually, food, I found, is the best thing to share. It brings people together. I mean, really, it does. It's wonderful.
It does.
And I I have some very conservative friends and folks. I went to college at a rather conservative institution, and I've got some folks that are definitely on the liberal side of things as well, and it's good to be in a potential community, in a community where there's diversity and you can have different voices, and it's not just an echo chamber, but it's also somewhat perilous. And so when you said this and read that headline, I'm reminded of the tobacco companies who were forced to not only, put the label on their packages, but also, actively promote public awareness and education campaigns that directly went against their bottom line and their profit margin. And I do think that Facebook here is trying to do some things to try and prevent regulation and certainly try to prevent a wholesale change of their business model. But ultimately, if we don't directly address the roots of surveillance capitalism on which Facebook is built, and address privacy and really carve out rights and have those rights, mean something with regulation and teeth and things that are written into legal code, I don't think that we're going to substantially change the ways that these tools are being weaponized and really used against the causes of representative democracy. So it's interesting they've chosen those countries as those trials. I do think that this sounds positive, but to think that Facebook is going to be able to adequately regulate itself and stem off any kind of call for regulation and outside limitation on its power or questioning of its, really it doesn't have to have gone as far as it did. And I'm not going to be able to remember the podcast that I was listening to where an expert was smarter than I was talking about that. But, maybe I can. Maybe it was actually Jason Snell talking on either Twit. I think it was on Twit. And he was talking about how, marketing and marketers, they want crazy amounts of information, but you don't have to have that much. And if you just sort of give them everything they want, they're going to take everything and they're going to, just have so much granular data. But, the thing is, we're headed towards a world where we probably are going to have a digital passport. I was listening to, I think it was BBC Digital Planet podcast tonight, and they were talking about this, not just in light of the pandemic, but they were talking about actually Brazil and banking and some real advances, quote unquote, that Brazil is making, and 100 million new people because of, the payouts that the country has done during COVID, now have bank accounts. And they're talking about, how they're going to be, enforcing a digital identity. The information that's gathered, right? If you are having, the centralized banking situation where there's all this data being exchanged, there can be all this data gathered. And the trajectory of technology has been that the folks controlling the technology have greater and greater power. Think about schools and filtering and the ways that schools can have a heavy hand there. Potentially, they don't all. But I do just kind of think that we're on a trajectory towards increased surveillance. But that doesn't mean we should give up. And it also doesn't mean we just need to cede, all of our rights and, it's just, there's nothing we can do. Maybe if you live in the Western province of China, there's little that you can do. And even if you try to do some things, you may be shipped off to a camp like, apparently a couple million people have been. But we need to try to do what we can. And I think that begins with privacy. The conversations that we have might be part of that. Education is certainly a part of it. And it's going to take more than Facebook, taking some steps. Isn't Facebook so good to take some steps now that the election's over?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I want to point out one other article that I think is a fascinating read. This is an article from Recode, how the COVID-19 pandemic broke Nextdoor. And I have to say, I am on the Nextdoor social media network. And if you're not aware of this tool, Nextdoor is a social media platform that you have to be living in a neighborhood to access. Like you can access your neighborhood and the surrounding areas. The idea is they're trying to build kind of social camaraderie amongst neighbors. And if I remember correctly, to get on this social network, I actually had to put my address in along with my email address. They sent me a card in the mail to make sure I was at that address, and I could utilize that address then with a code to get into the network. And so I'm part of what's called the Southgate Triangle neighborhood in Missoula, Montana, and I joined Nextdoor. And I have to say, some of it is useful, but a lot of it is kind of the, not necessarily friendly stuff that you might hope to have when you're trying to promote neighborliness, right? But this article talks about how the pandemic created a really bizarre confluence of kind of the same kind of stuff you saw on other social networks, anti-science posts, a lot of anger directed towards public health officials. But it does tell the story of one gentleman, I believe it's a physicist, who lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who was jumped on there and started trying to nudging people that were, claiming things that were, really anti-science, and actually went out and told a neighbor, so someone else on his particular Nextdoor area, that when he said that the pandemic is a hoax intended to help push political candidates, he said, "I'm sorry, this is not true. I demand that you take this down," and actually reported it to the Nextdoor website. And Nextdoor actually banned the account of the gentleman that reported the other thing, saying that he was not being very neighbor-like, and also that he wasn't helping, which is kind of the standard that they use for community in Nextdoor, that your post and your activity on the platform should be helping, not hurting. And it just gives you a sense of the challenge that we have. I mean, I think it's very admirable that we want to create methods for people to connect one another in this or that neighborhood, but it is also very challenging if we can't also acknowledge that we have to then police misinformation that might be happening inside of a neighborhood.
The web looked a lot different when it was mainly populated by early adopters, right?
Yeah.
And as society in mass comes online, we bring society's issues and problems and crime and all kinds of things with us. So it's interesting. My wife Shelly is on Nextdoor every once in a while. I honestly don't think I've opened the app in maybe a year. It's we learn about cars that are broken into our neighborhood and some different things. But it is it's a reflection. There's a lot of ways in which technology is like a mirror. It does reflect a lot of what's going on in our society. And I think part of what we need to decide individually is to what degree do we want to have whatever is being reflected in that social media environment to be part of our mental radar screen, mental landscape, mental thought process. And I think it's something important to talk to kids. I've I talk to my kids about hacking minds and how advertisements at a real basic level. And I say, I'm not anti-advertisement. I'm not anti-capitalism, right? And in fact, I want to know about things that are interesting to me. Like I love cooking. I really do. And it's been fun. In fact, with Facebook, we were talking about this before the show, like food brings people together. And it's really, I mean, what's great is to actually break bread together, not just virtually, but like actually do it. Someday, Jason and I are going to be having some barbecue and some Missoula beer. And, we're going to be doing that in person. But anyway, it's a good thing to come together. But it also, it's, at some point, advertising is manipulative, and we all need to be savvy. This is my Neil Postman channel here. We need to be savvy to how we can be manipulated, and our levers can be pushed, our buttons or whatever, levers pulled and buttons pushed, whatever, by advertisers. And this gets back, right back to what we're talking about with Facebook, because that is really the heart of a lot of the criticism is how there's a lot of nudging going on. And if you've seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, you must see it. So just put that on your bucket list right now to watch as soon as you can. Because one of the things that really made clear in that is how important nudging over time is, and how it's really sort of the perfect nudge machine, to try and whether you're wanting to get somebody to buy a product, or you're wanting to get somebody fired up about something, or push them in a way for political purposes, etc. We just don't yet have a handle on this. There's really smart people, much smarter than Jason and I that are working on this, thankfully, but we don't have a handle on it. And I think it's interesting, and maybe we'll have an article about this, how the platforms themselves are more substantively dealing with it than regulators and governments. I mean, we have GDPR in Europe, but the thing, I think maybe I'll just transition to this article, or did we talk about this with Chrome, the next version of Chrome with third party? Did we do that one last week?
Oh, we did not. We should definitely talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I put it actually under privacy. Maybe. No. Is it under the Googles? No. Is it under the tech correction?
Did we talk about it last week, maybe?
Maybe we did. So the next version of Chrome is going to basically get rid of third-party. Maybe I didn't put this article in yet. It's going to get rid of third-party advertisers, third-party cookies. And I don't know if you've tried to install Privacy Badger or one of these other programs that will block these third-party cookies, but it is shocking to see, because a cookie, that doesn't sound like a big deal, and again, I'd like to see more relevant ads, so what's the big deal? But we're talking about hundreds, and probably together, thousands, but even just on individual web pages, you can have hundreds of things. And this is how we're tracked across the web. And even though all the experts will say your phone doesn't listen to you, I've heard multiple people, and we've had the same experience where we've, like my wife and I have talked about something, and then she opens her Instagram feed, or I do, and boom, what do we see here? There's an ad. There are apps that you do, give permission to your microphone to, not to go, grab my tinfoil hat and put it on. I'm kind of getting there. But anyway, it's this is a big deal. And so Google is taking some steps with their next version of Chrome to block these. Ironically, that may give Google more power in terms of how they're handling, tracking and what they're doing with that. But Apple also, I think, is just trying to really, open up the transparency with requiring developers to disclose all the different ways that they collect information and have that right in front of us. And they're doing some other things to really push the industry. So I'll try to find that article, because I don't see it in the show notes from last week, and I don't think I see it here either. But it is pretty important in terms of Google, I think, advancing the cause of privacy.
And I would also note that one thing kind of related to this notion of things we can do to help evolve this process along. There's a great article in The Verge that talks about how social networks need better blocking tools. And Casey Newton argues that there's a whole host of new social networks that are on the horizon. One of them is called Block Party, and the other one is called Clubhouse. And Block Party and Clubhouse are new. I guess the best way to describe them is their audio social media applications. I've not played around with them yet. In fact, hadn't heard of with them until this article. And then I go to find out when I search for Block Party, or I'm sorry, for, well, both Block Party and Clubhouse, that they're kind of big deals. So that gives you a sense that maybe social media is passing me by. But the reason why that I think it's important to talk about this is that both platforms have built-in ways to block people you don't want to engage with, kind of baked into the initial premise of the social networking platforms itself. And the reason why I think that's a really important thing is because maybe that there's a new generation of social media applications. A lot of people for a long time would purport to talk about whatever the next Facebook was. I'm not saying necessarily that it's the next Facebook or not, but if we could start building some platforms that maybe could have a more trusting relationship with their users from the start and try to create ways to connect without, creating the antisocial behaviors we talked about earlier, I think that would be a really good thing. Wes, have you been on either Block Party or Clubhouse to this point?
I actually did get an invite to Clubhouse, and it's interesting. One of my favorite, Matthew Ingram, one of my favorite former GigaOM journalists that I still follow via a GigaOM Twitter list, made a comment, I think, yesterday, just how kind of disgusted he was about the cool kids and you had to have an iPhone and Android folks were out and whatever. But yeah, I learned about Clubhouse last week, got an invite, and have just barely listened to some things. And it's a new platform. There's mainly early adopters that are on there, and it is it reminds me, maybe Peggy can help us out with the name of the platform. There was the real-time audio where you back and forth, and you'd have these different rooms. We'll just show our age here, not being able to think about this. Peggy will know what it is. Anyway, it reminds me of that because it is a live. It's not a recorded kind of thing with the tool I'm thinking of. We used it for our EdCamp OKC for organize at one point, and it was kind of cool. And there were some conferences that people had over the holidays a few years ago using it, but you could go on there and catch up and you could listen to all this. I don't think with Clubhouse you can do that. I just think it's live, but it makes it a lot easier for people to join. And then to have a lot of folks. That's it. See, Peggy came through for us. Voxer.
There you go.
Yeah,
thanks, Peggy.
That's why it's great to have a chat room, ladies and gentlemen, and we encourage everybody who can to join us because it is wonderful to, get to say, hey, help us out. And look, there's the answer. So yeah, I've played with it a little bit, and okay, I don't know. I mean, at this point, podcasts are just phenomenal, and yes, it's cool to be able to talk live, but I honestly enjoy podcasts so much just because I can pause them.
Right.
It doesn't matter what the length is. I just listen to it when I can. And Peggy's also mentioning Periscope. I mean, there's a ton of tools that are definitely allowing for live interaction. Because this is what Facebook did too when it rolled out, right? It was exclusive. You had to have a college email in order to join, and people have this hype and whatever about being built up about being able to join it. But I did find that article, by the way. So last week, and I'll put this in the show notes for this week. I don't know whether we talked about it, but it's a Wired article from February 2nd, 2021. Google's next big Chrome update will rewrite the rules of the web. And this was talking about the impending takedown of third-party cookies in Chrome to be a big win for privacy, but it also says and Google, because Google could end up having a lot more power when there's not these third-party companies. And then I found another article that was just from January 25th, 2 weeks ago. Google effort to kill third-party cookies in Chrome rolls out in April. So unless you're on an early adopter dev channel for Chrome, you're not seeing this yet. But I think that, curbing some of the wild west of data gathering, really without permission. I mean, we do give permission when we use it, but it's the silly thing of, I'm going to click this because, if I don't, I can't even use this tool. It's a rather, I don't know if saying it's a coercive opt-in is accurate or not, but anyway, I think these are good moves, but it's going to be insufficient for Facebook on its own to be able to do these things. And although I applaud both Apple and Google for what they're doing, and really Google is more on the Facebook side of things in terms of its benefiting from that data gathering. But as our Six Colors friend mentioned on the Twit podcast,
Jason Snell.
It's getting bad, folks. It's really getting. You turn 50, it's real. All right, the brain cell loss is real. As Jason Snell said on Twit, marketing and advertising has happened and gone on for a long time before surveillance capitalism has reached this point, and we've gotten this invasive with data collection. And as they were saying on this, BBC Digital Planet podcast tonight, talking about Brazil and banking, the way that the systems are designed matters, and you don't have to have this voluminous, is that a word? Huge volume of data collection that's being archived and kept. Things can be designed in such a way so that you can have both visibility and transparency into what data you are sharing and to what is collected, and so that it's actually not being hoarded and kept by someone. And that can be a default position that, I think about, NSA and Homeland Security for the United States and AT&T and, the ways after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, we had, there were some terms for that, but we basically had these massive pipes that were, sort of jacked into the internet where they were just going to suck off all of the data that was flowing in and out of the United States and processing that. And just, anyway, there's dynamics here that are probably beyond regulation, which is just sort of the trajectory of where governments that have always spied on each other and have always done things covertly to try to, since the beginning of communication, the telegraph. We've always had these relationships that governments have had with telecoms. But I think that, like I said, we can't give up. We need to advocate for these things. And, we're not in the Western China right now with respect to, having to have an app installed on our phone that captures every single thing that we write or say or whatever. And we need to fight for that. Like, I think that is worth fighting for, to prevent whether it's Orwellian or it's, whatever dystopian, surveillance future. I think that these values are important and they're worth fighting for. So we can't give up.
Absolutely. Anything else in tech correction, sir?
Yeah. Let's see. This was a really great podcast interview from The Daily. So this is from February 5th, and I'm not listening to The Daily every day, but this was a February 5th podcast that was called the large, how big was it? The $2.7 billion case against Fox News. And so it is talking about this company called Smartmatic. And I'll drop a Reuters article from February 8th in there too, which is that Fox News asks Smartmatic for that the lawsuit, be dismissed. Basically, journalists for Fox News, and what they are claiming is, we were just reporting what, these different, conservative, political candidates and political leaders were saying. They literally invented, because this company Smartmatic wasn't even working in Georgia. They weren't even employed and didn't even have a contract. And in several of the other swing states, and I think it was in Pennsylvania as well, they had no contracts, but wholesale blame and just, massive losses that they've had and that they project to have. It's really a fascinating dive into this, because what they're contending, but this also could really chill speech, is that the law and lawsuits may have a potential to curb disinformation. In other words, to inhibit Fox News and other companies from literally just making, and I won't use any expletives here because this is a family show, but making stuff up when it came to what the alleged election fraud, and they were being really specific about this company. And the other thing that I'll say about this is, and maybe I can find this article to put this in. Shout out to my friend Brian, who is Wego Twits on Twitter, who's working on this conspiracies and culture wars project with me. QAnon has been a cult, and people are suffering losses of relationship, and just the cost of being fed disinformation and literally a stream of lies, repeatedly over time, has had a huge cost, and it is an ongoing cost that people are having. So I do think that we need to have accountability. It's really interesting in that podcast that I mentioned, The Daily, where the journalist is talking about how he tended to just be really I think he even worked for like BuzzFeed or something, but just, put it out there, get all the information out there. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you put out disinformation, it can have really toxic effects, especially when it's done in a coordinated effort, as we've seen before. And so I thought that was an interesting article, and it's going to be an important lawsuit to follow, because if it is not dismissed, and Fox does either have to settle or they end up having to pay a substantial fine, that could potentially have some chilling effect on journalists. But I think it also, and this is obviously the hopeful, idealistic, or optimistic view, perhaps it could really, push journalists even more to fact check and realize that you're going to have consequences if you're putting lies out here that have devastating impacts. So.
Absolutely. And I think that, there is no one solution to this. There is lots of solutions to this, and maybe legal action and the notion of liable is one of them.
Yep. Let's see. Let me do the Jack Dorsey article. I think I put that one in here. This is pretty fascinating. This is The Verge from February 9th. This is still under the tech correction. Back to the, thinking about the algorithm and Facebook and the problems that we have when there's this one opaque algorithm that you really don't know exactly how it works, but yet that's what feeds you your information, news, all this. This Reuters headline says, no, this is the wrong one. This is from The Verge on the 9th. Twitter's Jack Dorsey wants to build an app store for social media algorithms. So in his vision here, and I don't know if he's thinking out loud about this, or if this is something, how far along there's evidently a project they've worked on, but it's not super well developed. Twitter would have an algorithm where you could decide exactly how you want your news feed to work, and maybe even third-party folks could develop that, but it would give some clarity, some transparency to the algorithm that is creating the news feed. And so that's interesting that Dorsey is talking about that for Twitter. Could that happen for Facebook? I mean, that's really the secret sauce that generates them billions of dollars. So I don't know, but it is interesting as well as encouraging, I think, to see people wrestling with this and trying to think, how can we better leverage these tools that allow us to have fantastic connections and fantastic voice, but try and avoid some of these really negative consequences. And some of that may arguably come when you are having a single algorithm and letting this one company wield the tremendous power that they do wield today.
Well, and also remember, too, that there was a time, it still exists at a smaller level, but where you could download third-party Twitter apps, right? That's one thing very unique about Twitter's early days, is that you could download a third-party app and be able to do that. And I'd forgotten that existed until I went back to iOS as my main phone operating system, and I downloaded Tweetbot. And they're on a Tweetbot 6. It's costing me. I mean, their economic model is to charge you a per year cost to access Tweetbot. But I open up Tweetbot, and it's a completely different experience because they don't use the Twitter logarithm. So I'm seeing stuff that are people I follow, right? It's not that I don't see the people I follow. It's that Twitter tends to hand me stuff that it knows I'm going to engage with. So there's probably 10 or 15 people. Wes happens to be one of them that I'm pretty frequently popping likes or retweets on. And so I see their stuff first. And there's merit to that, obviously, right? Because I think it helps create engagement on the app. It also diminishes voices I haven't heard from in a while. It also diminishes people voice-wise that I've said I'm interested in. but it's not serving it to me because maybe some of their content I like and some of it I don't, or maybe they're new enough to me that I don't have a real sense of their point of view on things. So I think that notion of in a logarithm store is fascinating.
And here's a way, though, that we don't have to wait, and you can be shaping your feed right now. I was talking to my 17-year-old and asked her if she was using lists on Twitter. She's not. Use Twitter lists. Build lists of folks that have similar interests and whatever, or follow lists. You can go to anybody's user profile. So go to twitter.com/wfryer/lists. And I mean, there's a ridiculous number of lists that I've made, and I don't follow them all. But those are filtered feeds that don't get manipulated by the algorithm. As far as I know, it's the real time. This is how Twitter used to be. It used to just show you live, who just posted something a second or two ago. But now the algorithm, is in charge when you're on your home feed. But when you go to a list, you're back to sort of the old days, but you limit yourself to the people that are on that list. So I think that is really an important skill. And Twitter is just so wonderful. I mean, I used it this week when, this was like 2 days ago, the United Arab Emirates, I can transition to that space article, I think, they became the 5th country to send a spacecraft to another planet. And they successfully put their Hope probe in Mars orbit. How did I follow that? It was Twitter. They had a hashtag, Arabs in Mars, I think was the hashtag. And I was able to connect to their official Twitter feed, and then there's a live stream and all this. It is amazing to be able to follow events like that are happening in real time and being able to connect to different kinds of sources. The one other thing before we leave the tech correction, and I want to just mention, I don't know if you saw this, Jason, this is probably not going to pass Congress, but Amy Klobuchar, the headline for Ars Technica on February 5th, Klobuchar targets big tech with the biggest antitrust overhaul in 45 years. I don't know that this is going to be passed. Of course, we do have a Democratic administration now, but I actually think it's great that this is at least being written in legislation. She doesn't mention Facebook or the names of the companies, but it's called the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act, CALERA. I'll just read a quotation from it. Quote, while the United States once had some of the most effective antitrust laws in the world, our economy today faces a massive competition problem. This is Klobuchar. We can no longer sweep this issue under the rug and hope our existing laws are adequate. Calling the bill the first step towards overhauling and modernizing our laws to protect competition in the current era. And this article introduced me to a concept that I'd never heard of before, and it's called a monopsony, which is the same as a monopoly, except it's a concentrated market power that's inverted. Instead of one seller, there may be many sellers, but only one buyer. Anyway, we've got this with Facebook and also with Amazon, with ebooks and other kinds of things, this market dominance. So interesting, because this is, again, the tech correction in process. These are legislators, in this case, thinking about ways that the laws can be changed. How can we protect consumers? How can we protect privacy? How can we limit some of this power, and especially limit some of these really negative outcomes that we've seen happen because of the way social media and the information landscape and all of this has evolved over time. Did you, Dr. Neiffer, follow the Hope probe when it was captured into Mars orbit? Did you watch it live?
I did not watch it live. I did see an after a play of the video, but although I am into space, I think it pales in comparison to your space love. So,
well, this is the month where we're having 3 countries put spacecraft in Mars orbit, and 2 are going to land. So China, we don't know exactly the moment because they're less transparent, but they're going to be putting, we think, their first rover on the surface of Mars.
Wow.
Either this week or next week. And then I think the 18th, we're landing Perseverance. And that is going to, it has some pretty awesome technology that's going to let it land in what we believe was a lake bed in a delta, which should be really good for finding fossils. It's going to, dig down to try to find fossils, get the dirt, put it in a rocket, and actually we're going to fly around with like a helicopter UAV that they've put on it, and then it's going to send Martian rocks back to Earth, rendezvousing with another spacecraft and bringing it back. It's so cool. So I've been talking to my kids about this and just a little bit excited about it.
Well, sir, where to next?
Oh, let's see. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the Googles, a little updates for Chrome and Chromebook news? You got a couple.
Sure. There. Yeah, one kind of interesting piece that, in fact, both of these I think would have some interest to if you are the IT person in your school or you're at a Google school. First, Google Chrome is no longer support computers from the mid-2000s and earlier, and it's actually a very specific thing that they are adapting in the core code for the Chrome browser. But there was an instruction set that started being available, I think it was like 2006 or something, that called SSE3 or streaming SIMDB. That's an older technology, right? That was one of the instruction sets that would be on a chip, and they're going to drop support for it, which means the Chrome is not going to is no longer going to work on some of these older computers. The only reason why I mention this is that it would not be a surprise to me if there weren't some 12, 14, 15, 16-year-old computers, kicking around at some schools. I know that there are schools that struggle to afford tech refreshes on a regular basis, and to be honest, there are lots of ways to keep older computers like this running safe and securely, even at 15, 16, 17 years old. But if you are an older vintage computer user, then certainly you might want to keep that in mind. The Chrome, which may have been keeping you going from a secure browsing standpoint, is no longer going to be there. I am reminded I did a brief tour this week of the online platform that the Northwest Council for Computer Education is going to use at its March conference, March 17th through 18th. Go to ncc.org/conference21. And I was told a story by the vendor that that they had a computer user a couple weeks ago that was going through the demo with them, but was complaining that their Windows 98 machine was not working with the platform, which I'd be surprised to find out if anything in Windows 98 internet-wise still worked, but there are still people that like to use vintage computers. And then one more that I thought was an interesting bit. This is from Chrome Unboxed on February 4th. Google has started working on a new version of which would essentially be Chrome that runs over Chromebooks, that changes the way it utilizes bandwidth on a machine. And so it's going to give better performance for Meet and Zoom on Chromebooks because the way it uses the technology on that piece. And I have to say, I do know some teachers that are running live remote classes over Zoom or Google Meets that oftentimes have to share a screen to teach the lesson they're teaching over those live platforms. And if you're on an older Chromebook, it can sometimes be a real bummer because the fan starts whirling up and then you see a noticeable slowdown as you run out of processing power and RAM.
So the last 2 days we were remote learning as we had some ice and cold temperatures. I mean, terrible, Jason. It was 19 degrees. Can you believe we had such cold temperatures here? But we're Google Meet primarily, and one of the things I was finding myself wanting, I was using my laptop to have my kids over here, but like with Zoom, you can completely have that panel of faces in a separate window and easily put that on another screen.
Yep.
When screen sharing, which I'm often doing when I'm teaching, that panel is limited to only 16. At least I could see by joining, with another account. Maybe I could have used my same account, but anyway, I'm glad they're working on that, but it's still, as we've said, these platforms were not originally designed with education in mind. A couple weeks ago, or maybe it was even last week, we mentioned, Peggy had mentioned one, and then I mentioned another that was like Class by Zoom. There were some experiments that people are doing to try and develop some better platforms for the kinds of interactions that we want to have in school. So certainly the improvements with breakout rooms and things like that are really welcome. And I use that pretty much every day that we're remote learning, but lots to still be done. How about some security articles?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, I put a couple in there. First off, this one is scary. So this is ZDNet from February 8th. Hacker modified drinking water chemical levels in a U.S. city. Now, apparently, there is some precedent, and this is being reported. I actually heard this one on my Google News update when I just asked Google to tell me about the news today. But it was in Oldsmar, Florida, which I think might be close to Tampa, actually. And supposedly they saw it really quickly. It happened on February 5th. They changed the percent of sodium hydroxide from 100 parts per million to 11,100 parts per million. Which would be, possibly a poisonous, change. But they saw that this had happened, and they, were quickly able to revert the change. But yeah, is the local drinking water control system, in your community available to hackers? Is it on the web? These are the kind of things that definitely can kind of scare you when you start diving into this, and just if you're not tracking what's still being talked about with solar winds and how we're trying to figure out, just how deep the Russians were into just how many, U.S. government agencies as well as commercial entities, it's pretty crazy. But then this article actually flows right along with that. And this is the New York Times from February 6th. The title of this, which is an op-ed, is How the United States Lost to Hackers. And the subtitle is America's Biggest Vulnerability in Cyber Warfare is Hubris. And the author basically contends, because you've got offensive and defensive cyber operations. And the author is contending that the United States for so long has been, it's by Nicole Perlroth. We have relied so much on offense that we have really neglected defense. And these offensive tools are now in the hands of all kinds of actors. And we've had, former NSA employees become contractors and go to work for, different Middle Eastern countries that have, do not have a representative democracy. And, back to 2007 when Stuxnet happened. And if you're not familiar with that history, use the Wikipedia article, as I talked to my kids today, as a launch pad to launch you into that. Stuxnet was a joint operation between the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and the Israeli Intelligence Agency, which was very successful, but it got into the centrifuges of Iran, and we were able to, I say we, I live in the United States, we were able to actually, disable and I think blow up, centrifuges and cripple the Iranian nuclear effort for a while. But then Stuxnet was out in the wild. And so we've had these other hacks with these different packages. And this article talks a little bit about some of those. I'm trying to think of some of the names of them. But these things are now out in the wild. And the things that can be done, unfortunately, are devastating. And there's a subtitle here. It is a Pandora's box. So what does it mean? Number one, we need to be doing more computational thinking and coding. Does everyone need to become a coder? No. Does every student need to be introduced to some of the basics of computational thinking and coding? I would say absolutely yes. At a very bare minimum, we need to be aware of how algorithms are trying to, and in many cases succeeding in, manipulating us, feeding us information, shaping the world that we see, the things that we perceive, the things that we think about. And we need for our students to be part of these conversations, and we need, even more smart geeks to be out there, ethical, smart geeks to be out there, helping us navigate this world. It is sobering. It's the kind of article that makes me think, maybe we should move to a rural area where we have solar power and a well, and the loss of the electrical grid might not be devastating to us, because I read the book Lights Out wasn't by Brokaw. It was by one of our main. I'll have to Google it. Lights Out: A Cyber Attack, a Nation Unprepared, by Ted Koppel.
Yes.
One of the.
And by the way, I'm sorry, Martin Haraji, if you're listening tonight, because I should know the author of that book. But go ahead.
Have you read that one or listened to it?
I have. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it is. And anyway, the conversations that Jason and I have each week as we think about these things, some of these are just interesting to think about, and ooh, that's cognitively interesting. And then there's other things that you're like, I really need to get, a better handle on my own passwords and get rid of all those duplicates and those compromised passwords that I have. And then other things, make you think about preparedness and stuff like that. So good New York Times article. What's your prescription, Jason? Do you have a prescription for solving our cybersecurity?
Well, I do think we need to be training more cybersecurity folks, and I do think that I've seen a lot of great career pathways information where you can get started on this in high school, and I would say that if you're so inclined, it is a growth industry, and the pay is pretty solid, and you don't necessarily need a 2 and 4 year a college credential to get into the industry.
And at the Mountain Moot, which was hosted in the wonderful state of Montana last summer, and I'm sure will be happening again, I actually met somebody who is really involved in doing training for various agencies in the government and military. And yeah, it is a good career path, and one that actually companies like the company our son works for, Booz Allen Hamilton, they invest with hackathons and different kinds of competitions and events for kids. Yes, it's great to learn to play baseball and football and basketball and all of these things, but we need to be encouraging the geeks to, use their skills for good and not for evil, and to have opportunities to shine. And those kinds of opportunities for students, need to be amplified. And maybe you a young person in your life that you can point in the direction of some of those kinds of activities. So
absolutely.
All right, where to next?
Well, it looks like we are near the top of the hour. I wanted to get out a couple of quick, interesting Apple articles. I fear I'm opening Pandora's App Store here a little bit, but The Verge reported yesterday that there is a bill in North Dakota that would force Apple to allow alternative app stores and payment systems inside of their platforms. And there's several reasons why this is interesting. Obviously, my neighbor to the east, North Dakota, it's a neighbor of Montana, although the vastness of both Montana and North Dakota mean that I am nowhere near North Dakota. I could drive. If I drove to the east 8 hours, I would hit North Dakota. If I drove west 8 hours, I would hit the ocean. So that gives you a sense on how far away North Dakota is in the state of Montana. But they have a bill at the legislature that is in part has to do with this thing that Apple's got going with Fortnite, arguing about the 30% that Apple charges developers to use payment systems inside of there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Apple has pushed back to say that if you allow alternatives, it destroys the iPhone. And some Apple commentators said that was too much. The rhetoric was too much to say. But I have to say, one of the reasons why I am glad to be back on iOS is that I do feel more secure on iOS than I do on Android, because every other day there's a new set of articles that app garbage has ended up on the Play Store, which is what Android calls its app store, and stuff that's stealing your identity or way abusing the privileges of your phone. And you see a lot less of those references on Apple stuff, and Apple's starting to double down on privacy. And one of the ways that they can do that is by saying that since we control all the mechanisms of software on this platform, that we're able to then have some more serious privacy guarantees than they would be able to otherwise. So, Wes, do you anticipate that if this bill passes, you will immediately take your family to North Dakota to free up your iPad?
It'd be South Dakota. We've got, family in Huron. So we'd be going back to the Fryer tree claim, which, my dad still owned some land there until a few years ago. I don't think so. It'll be interesting, though, to see the impact of this kind of state legislation, right? Because in the same way that California has been pushing for privacy regulation and privacy rights, and there have been people wondering, like, is that then going to become the norm that, goes around the country? It'll be interesting to see how this is handled. Because at some point it's a federalism thing, right? Because it's a multinational corporation, it's a multi-state, obviously, corporation. And so does North Dakota have a unique, authority to be able to regulate and tell Apple what to do? I kind of think that would be a federal thing. So, but I'm not a lawyer, so Don't take my word for it.
Well, and what I would say is that California gets to throw its weight around because it's California with its nearly 40 million people, and by itself will be the 7th biggest economy on Earth. North Dakota has basically about a 60th of that population. Their population 762,000. My guess is that Apple's initial response to that wouldn't be to adapt its hardware to run other software app stores. It's going to be say that the iPad is no longer available in North Dakota, and that you can't buy it there, you can't take it there. They will put licensing information and licenses that you are not allowed to utilize an iPhone, an iPad, a MacBook Pro in the state of North Dakota. So, we'll have to see. Purely from the political geek part of me, I would be interested to find out how our good friends in North Dakota, might try to pull that off.
Absolutely. Let me do a quick couple more, and then I think we're probably top of the hour for Geek of the Week. I put these under connectivity. This is Ars Technica, February 9th. ISPs step up fight against SpaceX. Tell FCC that Starlink will be too slow. This is interesting. So as we've talked about on the show, whine. Starlink is the SpaceX initiative to bring high-speed satellite connectivity to Jason's family and millions of others potentially around the world. And they have successfully won some money promises from the FCC, from the federal government. And so, some people are upset. It's interesting how that whole auction business works. And rather than just like pay up front for connectivity, I think it might've been another article that I read, not this one, that was saying, look, the way we handle this is just kind of poor. We should just, pay these companies to, put in this connectivity and put in this bandwidth. The other article that I put in under connectivity is from Voice of America. And the headline from February 5th is, from Myanmar to Kashmir, unrest is met with internet blackouts. And if you did not know it, there was a military coup in the country of Myanmar. And I think President Biden just imposed by executive order some sanctions against their government and their military leaders. And part of the playbook of what we see different authoritarian and fascist leaders doing in the world today is they will turn off the internet. They will, in some cases, just like shut down access to Facebook and Twitter. But in some cases, they'll just freaking turn off the entire internet. And that's what happened. And journalists did not have an ability to report to the world about what was happening because cell phone tower connectivity was cut, landline internet, all of it was just cut. Interestingly, it kind of segues back to that Elon Musk article. Won't it be interesting when Starlink is available and when folks can, and I guess you could have a sat phone now, but when that access is greater, that even if the central government cuts off the internet or cuts off Facebook, hey, baby, I got myself a Starlink satellite here or satellite link up, and I'm going to still report the news. Journalism is hugely important. It's important around the world. And it's unfortunate, of course, to see this kind of thing happening. And hopefully, journalists are going to continue to find ways to report on what is happening within their country and provide a very important service in the whole realm of human rights and representative democracy and freedom and all those kind of things. So that's it. I think we probably ought to Geek of the Week it.
Okay. Would you like to start?
Sure. I only have one, and mine
cool.
is super cool. So this is from Live Science on September the 28th of last year. AI resurrects 54 Roman emperors in stunningly lifelike images. Now, shout out to Jonas Hamilton, one of our history teachers at our school, who points out that, did all these guys really look that handsome? We have Photoshop today, so who knows what kinds of embellishments the sculptors did. But basically, they have applied AI technology to create the most lifelike, visual images of these kind of creepy statues of they look zombie-like with these white eyes and stuff like that. And it's pretty cool. And I sent this to our teacher or one of our teachers that teaches Latin to say, hey, take a look at this. This is, kind of neat stuff. What do you have for us, Dr. Neiffer?
I'm excited to announce, this is actually my thing, which is not, that the second edition of basically my favorite education book of all time, Why Don't Students Like School, from Dr. Daniel Willingham, who's a cognitive scientist, is out soon. And I just noticed that my link on there is all funkified, so I wonder what the deal with that is. I will correct that link, but Why Don't Students Like School is an outstanding book that goes through essentially the power of cognitive science to help you be a better teacher. What I like about this book is it's not only goes through the theories and why, but it also does an excellent job of giving you suggestions about what this might look like in a practical classroom. Dr. Willingham has been very much at the forefront of helping dispel myths about learning styles, for example, which, by the way, cannot be confirmed in research and studies. It is a dated notion. If you're still running around trying to plan around learning styles, I think that your heart is in the right place, but perhaps your science is not. So again, I think it's out in the end of March, I believe, but I'm so excited for the second edition. It will include an entire chapter on research, cognitive research as it relates to the use of tech in the classroom.
Fantastic. Yeah, I don't think Amazon has that second edition maybe listed yet, but I did find the link here on Wiley.com. So I will drop that into the chat, and we'll put that into the show notes as well. So, Dr. Neiffer, where can folks find you when your partner remembers to show up on Wednesday nights and you're not here on the EdTech Situation Room?
Well, I am on the Twitters, Tech Savvy Teach, and as Wes very kindly showed before, I am part of the Northwest Council of Computer Education 2021 virtual conference, March 17th to 20th. I will be doing several presentations there, including, I think, 1, 2, 3 presentations that are brand new. I like to use NCCE every year to kind of break out some new stuff. ncce.org/conference 2021. And you, sir?
There you go. And I am W. Fryer on Twitter. You can find lots of links to continue learning with me at wesfryer.com/after, to include my food blog, which I'm continuing to enjoy updating. So we appreciate you tuning in. We want to encourage you to follow us on Twitter if you do not already. That is the best way, generally, to find out if we're not going to be here on Wednesday night. We try to do that early when we can. We want to thank Peggy for joining us in our chat room, as always. Encourage you to visit edtechsr.com, where you can find our small audio MP3 files that we've put up there on the Amazon cloud, as well as some smaller video versions. But you can always subscribe to us on YouTube, and you can check out our show notes, not only for this show that you'll find in that podcast episode, but you can always go to the gargantuan Google Doc, which is really maybe going to become a Guinness Book of World Records experiment. How long can a Google Doc with functional links actually get? And you can find that at edtechsr.com/links. So until next time, we encourage you to stay savvy, stay safe, and remember, debate skills are good. They can help you hopefully get through the fast conclusion of your show without too many stumbles. So yay, go debate.